everyone, and welcome back to the Reading Corner. I'm your host, Renee, and I am here for you every Wednesday reading stories from the public domain. We are continuing on this week with Sweeny Todd, so that's exciting. It's been a pretty interesting read so far, so if you haven't read any of the previous episodes, please go back and listen to them or read them yourself. But today we will be starting with Chapter 5. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Chapter 5. The Meeting in the Temple. Alas, poor Joanna Oakley, thy day has passed away and brought with it no tidings of him you love. And oh, what a weary day, full of fearful doubts and anxieties has it been. Tortured by doubts, hopes, and fears, that day was one of the most wretched that poor Joanna had ever passed. Not even 2 years before, when she had parted with her lover, had she felt such an exquisite pang of anguish as now filled her heart, when she saw the day gliding away and the evening creeping on apace, without word or token from Mark in Jestry. She did not herself know, until all the agony of disappointment had come across her, how much she had counted upon hearing something from him on that occasion. And when the evening deepened into night, and hope grew so slender that she could no longer rely upon it for the least support, she was compelled to proceed to her own chamber, and feigning indisposition to avoid her mother's questions, for Mrs. Oakley was at home, and making herself and everybody else as uncomfortable as possible, she flung herself on her humble couch and gave way to a perfect passion of tears. "Oh, Mark, Mark," she said, "why do you thus desert me, when I have relied so abundantly upon your true affection? Oh, why have you not sent me some token of your existence, of your continued love? The merest slightest word would have been sufficient, and I should have been happy." She wept then such bitter tears as only such a heart as hers can know when it feels the deep and bitter anguish of desertion, and when the rock upon which it supposed it had built its fondest hopes resolves itself to a mere quicksand, in which becomes engulfed all of good that this world can afford to the just and the beautiful. Oh, it is heart-rending to think that such a one as she, Joanna Oakley, a being so full of all those holy and gentle emotions which should constitute the truest felicity, should thus feel that life to her had lost its greatest charms, and that nothing but despair remained. "I will wait until midnight," she said, "and even then it will be a mockery to seek repose, and tomorrow I must myself make some exertion to discover some tidings of him." Then she began to ask herself what that exertion could be, and in what a manner a young and inexperienced girl, such as she was, could hope to succeed in her inquiries. And the midnight hour came at last, telling her that, giving the utmost latitude to the word day, it had gone at last, and she was left despairing. She lay the whole of that night sobbing, and only at times dropping into an unquiet slumber, during which painful images were presented to her, all, however, having the same tendency, and pointing toward the presumed fact that Mark in Jestry was no more. But the weariest night, to the weariest waker, will pass away, and at length the soft and beautiful dawn stole into the chamber of Joanna Oakley, chasing away some of the more horrible visions of the night, but having little effect in subduing the sadness that had taken possession of her. She felt that it would be better for her to make her appearance below than to hazard the remarks and conjectures that her not doing so would give rise to. So, all unfitted as she was to engage in the most ordinary intercourse, she crept down to the breakfast parlor, looking more like the ghost of her former self than the bright and beautiful being we have represented her to the reader. Her father understood what it was that robbed her cheeks of their bloom, and although he saw it with much distress, yet he fortified himself with what he considered were some substantial reasons for future hopefulness. It had become part of his philosophy. It generally is a part of the philosophy of the old to consider that those sensations of the mind that arise from disappointed affection are of the most evanescent character, and that although for a time they exhibit themselves with violence, they, like grief for the dead, soon pass away, scarcely leaving a trace behind of their former existence. And perhaps he was right as regards the greater number of those passions, but he was certainly wrong when he applied that sort of worldly-wise knowledge to his daughter Joanna. She was one of those rare beings whose hearts are not won by every gaudy flatterer who may buzz the accents of admiration in their ears. No, she was qualified, eminently qualified, to love once, but only once, and like the passion flower that blooms into abundant beauty once, and never afterwards puts forth a blossom, she allowed her heart to expand to the soft influence of affection, which, when crushed by adversity, was gone forever. "Really, Joanna," said Mrs. Oakley in the true conventional twang, "you look so pale and ill that I must positively speak to Mr. Lupin about you." "Mr. Lupin, my dear," said the spectacle-maker, "may be all very well in his way as a parson, but I don't see what he can have to do with Joanna looking pale." "A pious man, Mr. Oakley, has to do with everything and everybody." "Then he must be the most intolerable bore in existence, and I don't wonder at his being kicked out of some people's houses, as I have heard Mr. Lupin has been." "And if he has, Mr. Oakley, I can tell you he glories in it. Mr. Lupin likes to suffer for the faith, and if he were to be made a martyr tomorrow, I am quite certain it would give him a deal of pleasure." "My dear, I am quite sure it would not give him half the pleasure it would me." "I understand your insinuation, Mr. Oakley. You would like to have him murdered on account of his holiness. But though you can say these kinds of things at your own breakfast table, you won't say as much to him when he comes to tea this afternoon." "To tea, Mrs. Oakley? Haven't I told you over and over again that I will not have that man in my house?" "And haven't I told you, Mr. Oakley, twice that number of times that he shall come to tea? And I have asked him now, and it can't be altered." "But, Mrs. Oakley—" "It's of no use, Mr. Oakley, your talking. Mr. Lupin is coming to tea, and come he shall, and if you don't like it, you can go out. There now, I am sure you can't complain, now you have actually the liberty of going out. But you are like the dog in the manger, Mr. Oakley. I know that well enough, and nothing will please you." "A fine liberty indeed, the liberty of going out of my own house to let somebody else in that I don't like." "Joanna, my dear," said Mrs. Oakley, "I think my old complaint is coming on, of the beating of the heart and the hysterics. I know what produces it. It's your father's brutality. And just because Dr. Fungus said over and over again that I was to be perfectly quiet, your father seizes upon the opportunity like a wild beast or a raving maniac to try and make me ill." Mr. Oakley jumped up, stamped his feet upon the floor, and uttering something about the probability of his becoming a maniac in a very short time, rushed into his shop and set to polishing the spectacles as if he were doing it for a wager. This little affair between her father and mother certainly had had the effect, for a time, of diverting attention from Joanna, and she was able to assume a cheerfulness she did not feel. But she had something of her father's spirit in her as regarded Mr. Lupin, and most decidedly objected to sitting down to any meal whatever with that individual. so that Mrs. Oakley was left in a minority of one upon the occasion, which perhaps, as she fully expected it, was no great matter after all. Joanna went upstairs to her own room, which commanded a view of the street. It was an old-fashioned house, with a balcony in front, and as she looked listlessly out into Fore Street, which was far then from being the thoroughfare it is now, she saw, standing in a doorway on the opposite side of the way, a stranger, who was looking intently at the house, and who, when he caught her eye, walked instantly across to it, and cast something into the balcony of the first floor. Then he touched his cap and walked rapidly from the street. The thought immediately occurred to Joanna that this might possibly be some messenger from him, concerning whose existence and welfare she was so deeply anxious. It was not to be wondered at, therefore, that with the name of Markin Jestry upon her lips, she should rush down to the balcony in intense anxiety to hear, and see if such was really the case. When she reached the balcony, she found lying in it a scrap of paper, in which a stone was wrapped up, in order to give it weight, so that it might be cast with a certainty into the balcony. With trembling eagerness, she opened the paper, and read upon it the following words: "For news of Markin Jestry, come to the Temple Gardens 1 hour before sunset, and do not fear addressing a man who will be holding a white rose in his hand." "He lives! He lives!" she cried. "He lives, and joy again becomes the inhabitant of my bosom. Oh, it is daylight now, and sunshine compared to the black midnight of despair. Markin Jestry lives, and I shall be happy yet." She placed the little scrap of paper carefully in her bosom, and then, with clasped hands and a delighted expression of countenance, she repeated the brief and expressive words it contained, adding, "Yes, yes, I will be there. The white rose is an emblem of his purity and affection, his spotless love, and that is why his messenger carries it. I will be there 1 hour before sunset, aye, 2 hours before sunset, I will be there. Oh, joy, joy, he lives, he lives! Markin Jestry lives. Perchance, too, successful in his object, he returns to tell me that he can make me his, and that no obstacle can now interfere to frustrate our union. Time, time, float onward on your fleetest pinions." She went to her own apartment, but it was not, as she had last gone to it, to weep. On the contrary, it was to smile at her former fears, and to admit the philosophy of the assertion that we suffer much more from a dread of those things that never happen than we do for actual calamities which occur in their full force to us. "Oh, that this messenger," she said, "had come but yesterday! What hours of anguish I should have been spared! But I will not complain. It shall not be said that I repine at present joy because it did not come before. I will be happy when I can, and in the consciousness that I shall soon hear blissful tidings of Markin Jestry, I will banish every fear." The impatience which she now felt brought its pains and its penalties with it, and yet it was quite a different description of feeling to any she had formerly endured, and certainly far more desirable than the absolute anguish that had taken possession of her upon hearing nothing of Markin Jestry. It was strange, very strange, that the thought never crossed her mind that the tidings she had to hear in the Temple Gardens from the stranger might be evil ones. But certainly such a thought did not occur to her, and she looked forward to a meeting which she certainly had no evidence to know might not be of the most disastrous character. She asked herself over and over again if she should tell her father what had occurred, but as often as she thought of doing so, she shrank from carrying out the mental suggestion, and all the natural disposition again to keep to herself the secret of her happiness returned to her in full force. But yet she was not so unjust as not to feel that it was treating her father but slightingly to throw all her sorrows into his lap, as it were, and then to keep from him everything of joy appertaining to the same circumstances. This was a thing that she was not likely to continue doing, and so she made up her mind to relieve her conscience from the pang it would otherwise have had, by determining to tell him, after the interview in the Temple Gardens what was its result. But she could not make up her mind to do so beforehand. It was so pleasant and so delicious to keep the secret all to herself, and to feel that she alone knew that her lover had so closely kept faith with her as to be only one day behind his time in sending to her, and that day perhaps far from being his fault. And so she reasoned to herself and tried to while away the anxious hours, sometimes succeeding in forgetting how long it was still to sunset, and at others feeling as if each minute was perversely swelling itself out into 10 times its usual proportion of time in order to become wearisome to her. She had said that she would be at the Temple Gardens 2 hours before sunset instead of 1, and she kept her word, for looking happier than she had done for weeks, she tripped down the stairs to her father's house, and was about to leave it by the private staircase when a strange, gaunt-looking figure attracted her attention. This was no other than the Reverend Mr. Lupin. He was a long, strange-looking man, and upon this occasion he came upon what he called horseback. That is to say, he was mounted upon a very small pony, which seemed quite unequal to support his weight, and was so short, if the reverend gentleman had not poked his legs out at an angle, they must inevitably have touched the ground. "Praise the Lord," he said. "I have intercepted the evil one. Maiden, I have come here at thy mother's bidding, and thou shalt remain and partake of the mixture called tea." Joanna scarcely condescended to glance at him, but drawing her mantle close round her, which he actually had the impertinence to endeavour to lay hold of, she walked on, so that the reverend gentleman was left to make the best he could of the matter. "Stop!" he cried. "Stop! I can well perceive that the devil has a strong hold of you. I can well perceive. The Lord have mercy upon me. This animal hath some design against me, as sure as fate." "I am afraid, sir," said a lad who was no more than our old acquaintance Sam, "I am afraid, sir, that there's something the matter with that pony." Up went the pony's heels again, in the same unaccountable manner. "God bless me," said the reverend gentleman. "He never did such a thing before. Aye, there he goes again. Murder! Young man, I pray you to help me get down. I think I know you. You are the nephew of the goodly Mrs. Pump. Truly, this animal wishes to be the death of me." At this moment the pony gave such a vigorous kick up behind that Mr. Lupin was fairly pitched upon his head, and made a complete somersault, alighting with his heels in the spectacle maker's passage. And it unfortunately happened that Mrs. Oakley at that moment, hearing the altercation, came rushing out, and the first thing she did was to fall sprawling over Mr. Lupin's feet. Sam now felt it was time to go, and as we dislike useless mysteries, we may as well explain that these extraordinary circumstances arose from the fact that Sam had bought himself from the haberdasher's opposite a halfpenny worth of pins, and had amused himself by making a pincushion of the hind quarters of Reverend Lupin's pony, which, not being accustomed to that sort of thing, had kicked out vigorously in opposition to the same, and produced the results we have recorded. Joanna Oakley was some distance upon her road before the reverend gentleman was pitched into her father's house in the manner we have described, so that she knew nothing of it, nor would she have cared if she had, for her mind was wholly bent upon the expedition she was proceeding on. As she walked upon that side of the way of Fleet Street where Sweeny Todd's house and shop were situated, a feeling of curiosity prompted her to stop for a moment and look at the melancholy-looking dog that stood watching a hat at his door. The appearance of grief upon the creature's face could not be mistaken, and as she gazed, she saw the shop door gently opened and a piece of meat thrown out. "Those are kind people," she said. But when she saw the dog turn away from the meat with loathing, and herself observed that there was a white powder upon it, the idea that it was poisoned and only intended for the poor creature's destruction came instantly across her mind, and when she saw the horrible-looking face of Sweeny Todd glaring at her from the partially open door, she could not doubt any further the fact, for the face was quite enough to give a warrant for any amount of villainy whatever. She passed on with a shudder, little suspecting, however, that the dog had anything to do with her fate, or the circumstances which made up the sum of her destiny. It wanted a full hour to the appointed time of meeting when she reached the Temple Gardens, and partly blaming herself that she was so soon, while at the same time she would not for worlds have been away, she sat down on one of the garden seats to think over the past, and to recall to her memory, with the vivid freshness of young love's devotion, the many gentle words which, from time to time, had been spoken to her 2 summers since by him whose faith she had never doubted, and whose image was enshrined at the bottom of her heart. Chapter 6. The Conference, and the Fearful Narration in the Garden. The temple clock struck the hour of meeting, and Joanna looked anxiously around her for anyone who should seem to her to bear the appearance of being such a person as she might suppose Markin Jestry would choose for his messenger. She turned her eyes toward the gate, for she thought she heard it close, and then she saw a gentlemanly-looking man, attired in a cloak, and who was looking around him, apparently in search of someone. When his eye fell upon her, he immediately produced from beneath his cloak a white rose, and in another minute they met. "I have the honor," he said, "of speaking to Miss Joanna Oakley."
"Yes, sir. And you are Markin Jestry's messenger?"
"I am. That is to say, I am he who comes to bring you news of Markin Jestry, although I grieve to say I am not the messenger that was expressly deputed by him to do so."
"Oh, sir, your looks are sad and serious. You seem as if you would announce that some misfortune has occurred. Tell me that it is not so. Speak to me at once, or my heart will break."
"Compose yourself, lady, I pray you."
"I cannot. I dare not do so, unless you tell me he lives. Tell me that Markin Jestry lives, and then I shall be all patience. Tell me that, and you shall not hear a murmur from me. Speak the word at once, at once! It is cruel, believe me, it is cruel to keep me in suspense."
"This is one of the saddest errands I ever came upon," said the stranger, as he led Joanna to a seat. "Recollect, lady, what creatures of accidents and chance we are. Recollect how the slightest circumstance will affect us in driving us to the confines of despair, and remember by how frail a tenure the best of us hold existence."
"No more, no more!"
shrieked Joanna, as she clasped her hands.
"I know all now, and I am desolate."
She let her face drop upon her hands, and shook as with a convulsion of grief.
"Mark, Mark, you have gone from me. I thought not this, I thought not this. Oh, heaven, why have I lived so long as to have the capacity to listen to such fearful tidings? Lost, lost, all lost! God of heaven, what a wilderness the world is now to me!"
"Let me pray you, lady, to subdue this passion of grief, and listen truly to what I shall unfold to you. There is much to hear, and much to speculate upon, and if, from all that I have learnt, I cannot, dare not tell you that Markin Jestry lives, I likewise shrink from telling you that he is no more."
"Speak again, say those words again. There is hope, then? Oh, there is a hope."
"There is a hope. And better is it that your mind should receive the first shock of the probability of the death of him whom you have so anxiously expected, and then afterward, from what I shall relate to you, gather hope that it may not be so, than that from the first you should expect too much, and then have those expectations rudely destroyed."
"It is so, it is so. This is kind of you. And if I cannot thank you as I ought, you will know that it is because I am in a state of too great affliction to do so. and not from want of will. You will understand that. I am sure you will understand that.
Make no excuses to me. Believe me, I can fully appreciate all that you would say and all that you must feel. I ought to tell you who I am, that you may have confidence in what I have to relate to you. My name is Geoffrey, and I am a colonel in the Indian army.
I am much beholden to you, sir, but you bring with you a passport to my confidence, in the name of Markin Jestry, which is at once sufficient. I live again in the hope that you have given me of his continued existence, and in that hope I will maintain a cheerful resignation that shall enable me to bear up against all you have to tell me, be that what may, and with a feeling that through much suffering there may come joy at last. You shall find me very patient, ay, extremely patient, so patient that you shall scarcely see the havoc that grief has already made here.
She pressed her hands upon her breast as she spoke, and looked in his face with such an expression of tearful melancholy that it was quite heartrending to witness it. And he, although not used to the melting mood, was compelled to pause for a few moments ere he could proceed in the task which he had set himself. "I will be as brief," he said, "as possible, consistent with stating all that is requisite for me to state, and I must commence by asking you if you are aware under what circumstances it was that Markin Jestry went abroad."
"I am aware of so much, that a quarrel with his uncle, Mr. Grant, was the great cause, and that his main endeavour was to better his fortunes, so that we might be happy and independent of those who looked not with an eye of favour upon our projected union."
"Yes, but what I meant was, were you aware of the sort of adventure he embarked into the Indian seas?"
"No, I knew nothing further. We met here on this spot. We parted at yonder gate, and we have never met again."
"Then I have something to tell you, in order to make the narrative clear and explicit."
"I shall listen to you with an attention so profound that you shall see how my whole soul is wrapped up in what you say."
They both sat upon the garden seat, and while Joanna fixed her eyes upon her companion's face, expressive as it was of the most generous emotions and noble feelings, he commenced relating to her the incidents which never left her memory, and in which she took so deep an interest. "You must know," he said, "that what it was which so much inflamed the imagination of Markin Jestry consisted in this. There came to London a man with a well authenticated and extremely well put together report, that there had been discovered in one of the small islands near the Indian seas a river which deposited an enormous quantity of gold dust in its progress to the ocean. He told his story so well, and seemed to be such a perfect master of all the circumstances connected with it, that there was scarcely room for a doubt upon the subject. The thing was kept quiet and secret, and a meeting was held of some influential men, influential on account of the money they possessed, among whom was one who had towards Markin Jestry most friendly feelings. So Mark attended the meeting with this friend of his, although he felt his utter incapacity, from want of resources, to take any part in the affair. But he was not aware of what his friend's generous intentions were in the matter until they were explained to him, and they consisted in this. He, the friend, was to provide the necessary means for embarking in the adventure, so far as regarded taking a share in it, and he told Markin Jestry that if he would go personally on the expedition, he should share in the proceeds with him, be they what they might. Now, to a young man like Jestry, totally destitute of personal resources, but of ardent and enthusiastic temperament, you can imagine how extremely tempting such an offer was likely to be. He embraced it at once with the greatest pleasure, and from that moment he took an interest in the affair of the closest and most powerful description. It seized hold of his imagination completely, presenting itself to him in the most tempting colors. and from the description that has been given me of his enthusiastic disposition, I can well imagine with what kindness and impetuosity he would enter into such an affair."
"You know him well?"
said Joanna gently. "No, I never saw him. All that I say concerning him is from the description of another, who did know him well, and who sailed with him in the vessel that ultimately left the port of London on the vague and wild adventure that I have mentioned."
"That one, be he who he may, must have known Mark and Jestry well, and have enjoyed much of his confidence to be able to describe him so accurately."
"I believe that such was the case. And it is from the lips of that one, instead of from mine, that you ought to have heard what I am now relating. That gentleman, whose name was Thornhill, ought to have made to you this communication, but by some strange accident, it seems, he has been prevented, or you would not be here listening to me upon a subject which would have come better from his lips."
"And was he to have come yesterday to me?"
"He was."
"Then Mark and Jestry kept his word, and but for the adverse circumstances which delayed his messenger, I should yesterday have heard what you are now relating to me. I pray you go on, sir, and pardon the interruption."
"I need not trouble you with all the negotiations, the trouble, and the difficulty that arose before the expedition could be started fairly. Suffice it to say that at length, after much annoyance and trouble, it was started, and a vessel was duly chartered and manned for the purpose of proceeding to the Indian seas in search of the treasure, which was reported to be there for the first adventurer who had the boldness to seek it. It was a gallant vessel. I saw it sail many a mile from England ere it sunk beneath the waves, never to rise again."
"Sunk?"
"Yes, it was an ill-fated ship, and it did sink, but I must not anticipate. Let me proceed in my narrative with regularity. The ship was called the Star, and if those who went with it looked upon it as the star of their destiny, they were correct enough, and it might be considered an evil star for them, inasmuch as nothing but disappointment and bitterness became their ultimate portion. And Mark and Jestry, I am told, was the most hopeful man on board. Already in imagination he could fancy himself homeward bound with the vessel, ballasted and crammed with the rich produce of that shining river. Already he fancied what he could do with his abundant wealth, and I have no doubt but that, in common with many who went on the adventure, he enjoyed to the full the spending of the wealth he should obtain in imagination. Perhaps, indeed, more than if he had obtained it in reality. Among the adventurers was one Thornhill, who had been a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, and between him and young Jestry there arose a remarkable friendship. A friendship so strong and powerful that there could be no doubt that they communicated to each other all their hopes and fears, and if anything could materially tend to beguile the tedium of such a weary voyage as those adventurers had undertaken, it certainly would be the free communication and confidential intercourse between two such kindred spirits as Thornhill and Mark and Jestry. You will bear in mind, Miss Oakley, that in making this communication to you, I am putting together what I myself heard at different times, so as to make it for you a distinct narrative, which you can have no difficulty in comprehending, because, as I before stated, I never saw Mark and Jestry, and it was only once, for about 5 minutes, that I saw the vessel in which he went upon his perilous adventure. For perilous it turned out to be, to the Indian seas. It was from Thornhill I got my information during the many weary and monotonous hours consumed in a homeward voyage from India. It appears that without accident or cross of any description, the Star reached the Indian Ocean, and the supposed immediate locality of the spot where the treasure was to be found, and there she was spoken with by a vessel homeward bound from India called the Neptune. It was evening, and the sun had sunk in the horizon with some appearances that betokened a storm. I was on board that Indian vessel. We did not expect anything serious, although we made every preparation for rough weather. And as it turned out, it was well indeed we did, for never within the memory of the oldest seaman had such a storm ravaged the coast. A furious gale, which it was impossible to withstand, drove us southward. and, but for the utmost precautions, aided by courage and temerity on the part of the seamen, such as I had never before witnessed in the merchant service, we escaped with trifling damage. But we were driven at least 200 miles out of our course, and instead of getting, as we ought to have done, to the Cape by a certain time, we were an immense distance east of it. It was just as the storm, which lasted 3 nights and 2 days, began to abate, that toward the horizon we saw a dull red light. And as it was not in a quarter of the sky where any such appearance might be imagined, nor were we in a latitude where electric phenomena might be expected, we steered toward it, surmising what turned out afterwards to be fully correct.
"It was a ship on fire," said Joanna.
It was.
"Alas, alas, I guessed it. A frightful suspicion from the first crossed my mind. It was a ship on fire, and that ship was—"
"The Star, still bound upon its adventurous course, although driven far out of it by adverse winds and waves. After about half an hour's sailing, we came within sight distinctly of a blazing vessel. We could hear the roar of the flames, and through our glasses we could see them curling up the cordage and dancing from mast to mast like fiery serpents, exulting in the destruction they were making. We made all sail and strained every inch of canvas to reach the ill-fated vessel, for distances at sea that look small are in reality very great, and an hour's hard sailing in a fair wind, with every stitch of canvas set, would not do more than enable us to reach that ill-fated bark. But fancy, in an hour, what ravages the flames might make. The vessel was doomed. The fiat had gone forth that it was to be among the things that had been, and long before we could reach the spot upon which it floated idly on the now comparatively calm waters, we saw a bright shower of sparks rush up into the air. Then came a loud roaring sound over the surface of the deep, and all was still. The ship had disappeared, and the water closed over her forever.
"But how you knew?"
as she clasped her hands, and the pallid expression of her countenance betrayed the deep interest she took in the narration.
"How knew you that the ship was the Star? Might it not have been some other ill-fated vessel that met with so dreadful a fate?"
"I will tell you. Although we had seen the ship go down, we kept on our course, straining every effort to reach the spot, with the hope of picking up some of the crew, who surely had made an effort by the boats to leave the burning vessel. The captain of the Indiamen kept his glass at his eye, and presently he said to me, 'There is a floating piece of wreck, and something clinging to it. I know not if there be a man, but what I can perceive seems to me to be the head of a dog.' I looked through the glass myself, and saw the same object. But as we neared it, we found it was a large piece of the wreck, with a dog and a man supported by it, who were clinging with all the energy of desperation. In 10 minutes more we had them on board the vessel. The man was Lieutenant Thornhill, I have before mentioned, and the dog belonged to him. He related to us that the ship we had seen burning was the Star, and that it had never reached its destination, and that he believed all had perished but himself and the dog. For although one of the boats had been launched, so desperate a rush was made into it by the crew that it had swamped, and all perished. Such was his own state of exhaustion, that after he had made this short statement, it was some days before he left his hammock. But when he did, and began to mingle with us, we found an intelligent, cheerful companion. Such a one, indeed, as we were glad to have on board. And in confidence he related to the captain and myself the object of the voyage of the Star, and the previous particulars with which I have made you acquainted. And then, during a night watch, when the soft and beautiful moonlight was more than usually inviting, and he and I were on the deck, enjoying the coolness of the night, after the intense heat of the day in the tropics, he said to me, 'I have a very sad mission to perform when I get to London. On board our vessel was a young man named Mark Ingestry, and some short time before the vessel in which we went down, he begged of me to call upon a young lady named Joanna Oakley, the daughter of a spectacle maker in London, providing I should be saved and he perish. and of the latter event he felt so strong a presentiment that he gave me a string of pearls, which I was to present to her in his name. But where he got them I have not the least idea, for they are of immense value. Mr. Thornhill showed me the pearls, which were of different sizes, roughly strung together, but of great value. And when we reached the river Thames, which was only 3 days since, he left us with his dog, carrying his string of pearls with him, to find out where you reside.
Alas, he never came.
No. From all the inquiries we can make, and all the information we can learn, it seems he disappeared somewhere about Fleet Street.
Disappeared?
Yes. We can trace him to the Temple Stairs, and from thence to a barber's shop, kept by a man named Sweeny Todd. But beyond there, no information of him can be obtained.
Sweeny Todd?
Yes. And what makes the affair more extraordinary is that neither force nor persuasion will induce Thornhill's dog to leave the place.
I saw it. I saw the creature, and it looked imploringly, although kindly, in my face. A little did I think, when I paused a moment to look upon that melancholy but faithful animal, that it held a part in my destiny. Oh, Markin Jestry, dare I hope that you live, when all else have perished?
I have told you all that I can tell you, and according as your own judgment may dictate to you, you can encourage hope, or extinguish it forever. I have kept back nothing from you which can make the affair worse or better. I have added nothing, but you have it simply as it was told to me.
He is lost. He is lost.
I am one, lady, who thinks certainty of any sort preferable to suspense, and although, while there is no positive news of death, the continuance of life ought fairly to be assumed, yet you must perceive, from a review of all circumstances, upon how very slender a foundation all our hopes must rest.
I have no hope. He is lost to me forever. It were madness to think he lived. Oh, Mark. And is this the end of our fond affection? Did I indeed look my last upon that face, when on this spot we parted?
The uncertainty, said Colonel Jeffrey, wishing to withdraw as much as possible from a consideration of her own sorrows. The uncertainty, too, that prevails with regard to the fate of poor Mr. Thornhill is a sad thing. I much fear that those precious pearls he had have been seen by someone who has not scrupled to obtain possession of them by his death.
Yes, it would seem so indeed. But what are pearls to me? Oh, would that they had sunk to the bottom of that Indian sea from whence they had been plucked. Alas, it has been their thirst for gain that has produced all these evils. We might have been poor here, but we should have been happy. Rich we ought to have been in contentment. But now all is lost, and the world to me can present nothing that is to be desired, but one small spot large enough to be my grave.
She leant upon the arm of the garden seat, and gave herself up to such a passion of tears that Colonel Jeffrey felt he dared not interrupt her. There is something exceedingly sacred about real grief, which awes the beholder, and it was with an involuntary feeling of respect that Colonel Jeffrey stepped a few paces off, and waited until that burst of agony had passed away. It was during those brief moments that he overheard some words uttered by one who seemed likewise to be suffering from that prolific source of all affliction, disappointed affection. Seated at some short distance was a maiden, and one not young enough to be called a youth, but still not far enough advanced in existence to have had all his better feelings crushed by an admixture with the cold world, and he was listening while the maiden spoke. "It is the neglect," she said, "which touched me to the heart. But one word spoken or written, one message of affection, to tell me that the memory of a love I thought would be eternal, still lingered in your heart, would have been a world of consolation. But it came not, and all was despair." "Listen to me," said her companion, "and if ever in this world you can believe that one who truly loves can be cruel to be kind, believe that I am that one. I yielded for a time to the fascination of a passion which should never have found a home within my heart, but yet it was far more of a sentiment than a passion, inasmuch as never for one moment did an evil thought mingle with its pure aspirations. It was a dream of joy, which for a time obliterated a remembrance that ought never to have been forgotten. But when I was rudely awakened to the fact that those whose opinions were of more importance to your welfare and your happiness knew nothing of love, but in its grossest aspect, it became necessary at once to crush a feeling, which in its continuance could shadow forth nothing but evil. You may not imagine, and you may never know, for I cannot tell the heart pangs that it has cost me to persevere in a line of conduct which I felt was due to you, whatever heart pangs it might cost me. I have been content to imagine that your affection would turn to indifference, perchance even to hatred, that a consciousness of being slighted would arouse in your defence all a woman's pride, and that thus you would be lifted above regret. Farewell for ever. I dare not love you honestly and truly, and better it is thus to part than to persevere in a delusive dream that can but terminate in degradation and sadness. Do you hear those words? Whispered Colonel Geoffrey to Joanna. You perceive that others suffer, and from the same cause, the perils of affection. I do. I will go home and pray for strength to maintain my heart against this sad affliction. The course of true love never yet ran smooth. Wonder not, therefore, Joanna Oakley, that yours has suffered such a blight. It is the great curse of the highest and noblest feelings of which humanity is capable, that while, under felicitous circumstances, they produce an extraordinary amount of happiness, when anything adverse occurs, they are most prolific sources of misery. Shall I accompany you? Joanna felt grateful for the support of the colonel's arm toward her own home, and as they passed the barber's shop, they were surprised to see that the dog and the hat were gone. And that is where we are going to leave it for today. Thank you for joining me. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please hit that like and subscribe button, pop a comment in the chat, engage with the content and share me, get me out there. But otherwise, I'll be seeing you guys later. Bye!